Let's get a check now of the top business news stories. Our business editor, Kate Moody's here. Hi there, Kate. Let's begin with the latest developments from the US Federal Reserve.
Yeah, the central bank is keeping interest rates on hold for now and opening the door to paring back or tapering its monetary stimulus in the months to come. The US economy has been strongly recovering from the pandemic, but the Fed said the recent rise in COVID cases had had a negative impact. It revised its forecast for growth downwards from 7% seen in June to just 5.9% now expected for 2021. The Fed cut interest rates to near zero in March 2020 as the pandemic hit. The dot plot, which represents opinions from different Fed policymakers, suggests that rates could begin rising sometime in 2022. Well, let's cross now to Christian Lawrence, Senior Market Strategist at Rabobank New York. Thanks for being with us on France 24. What do you make of today's policy decisions? Are there any surprises about timing or perhaps lack thereof?
Well, I suppose the biggest surprise was the explicit guidance as to when tapering might finish, i.e. the middle of next year, which implies a pace of tapering of around about 10 billion in treasuries and 5 billion in MBS each month. So that explicit guidance, I don't think that was expected at this stage. But of course, the fact that the Fed will begin tapering QE in the coming months was already certainly in the price. I think the other big shift is, of course, that we now see a 9-to-9 split as to whether rates will increase next year. 9 members are not expecting any rate increases in 2022, 6 members expecting 1 rate increase, and 3 members expecting 2 rate increases. So a very diverged range of views within the FOMC itself.
One of the issues that's been causing some concern is the pace of inflation. It soared to its highest level in a decade. The Fed's still saying that fast pace of price rises remains transitory.
Well, I think part of the reason for that is the sort of inflation we're seeing at the moment is primarily cost push. It's being driven by supply side issues with respect to constraints in supply chains, etc. And quite frankly, the Fed doesn't have the tools to combat that sort of inflation. Raising interest rates doesn't help you get a ship from Asia over to the US. So actually raising interest rates right now could prove counterproductive on the inflation story. Really, the Fed's ability to control inflation is when it comes to tempering demand. And that isn't primarily the sort of inflation we're seeing right now.
Remind our viewers, if you will, how these decisions by the Federal Reserve on interest rates, on monetary policy, really affect American households.
Well, primarily through the interest rate channel, and that impacts a lot of different avenues, including the housing market, for example. It could increase the cost of mortgages, but it also affects corporate America significantly, and then in turn, it can affect employment. So it really is absolutely critical, even for the average consumer on the street. This isn't just Wall Street that is impacted by these decisions.
Jerome Powell said that demand for labor in the United States is extremely strong. Recent data has shown job openings outpacing hirings. Is this going to be a problem for the labor market going forward?
Well, this is an incredibly difficult topic because we know this year there have been a lot of labor market distortions because of the additional benefits that have been provided by the government, discouraging some people from going back to the workforce. But those benefits are now running out. Savings are starting to decline. So in the coming months, we should get a much better idea for the true state of the labor market.
I just want to switch gears slightly now because one issue that's been hanging over Washington is the debt ceiling. The Senate deadlocked over a measure to raise that ceiling and fund the government. Do you think we might be heading for another shutdown and even a possible default?
Well, I think with this scenario, it's always at 1 minute to midnight that we get an outcome here. And I tend to think this is really a game of chicken that we're seeing between the Democrats and the Republicans. But I don't think that we're going to see anything in the way of a default. I think that an agreement will be reached at the last minute. And there are other measures to essentially delay this issue, budget reconciliation, for example. So it's not a disaster for the US economy. It's not an upcoming disaster for the US economy, I don't think, no.
All right, Christian Lawrence from Rabobank New York. Thanks, as always, for that insight into what's going on in Washington today.
Thank you.
Let's just check in on the day's trading action now. Wall Street adding slightly to its earlier gains as those announcements came in. We're seeing the Dow Jones rallying about 350 points there. The Nasdaq and S&P 500 each up around 0.8 of 1 percentage point. Microsoft shares have risen over 1% after it unveiled 4 new tablet computers and a folding phone. The major European indices closed higher, gains of between 1 and 1.5% in London, Paris, Frankfurt, and Milan. Fresh data showed an uptick in EU consumer confidence in the month of August. Netflix has bought the rights to all works by the late Roald Dahl, author of children's classics like The BFG, The Twits, and Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. The financial terms have not been disclosed, but it marks Netflix's biggest content scoop ever. James Vicina has more.
It's a mouth-watering announcement for both children and adults. This time it isn't Charlie who's won a visit to the chocolate factory, but Netflix viewers who'll dive into the entire imaginary world of Roald Dahl. The streaming service giant has been collaborating with the Roald Dahl Story Company since 2018 and had struck deals to create animated series based on 16 of the British author's books. It's now taking over the family business, which manages the rights to Roald Dahl's works. From Matilda to James and the Giant Peach, many of the classic novels have already been adapted for television or into plays, a market that Netflix will now be able to branch out to. But the move is also an attempt to remain ahead of streaming competitors. With 209 million subscribers worldwide, Netflix is still leading the streaming race, ahead of Amazon Prime, whose 175 million e-commerce members have access to its own streaming platform. Competition is fierce, with the likes of Apple TV and Disney Plus also trying to close in. In Europe, Swedish company Viaplay is banking on its sports rights to the Premier League and to Formula One to cause havoc in the streaming market in the years to come. A market that surged over the past year, with subscriptions rocketing during lockdowns.
There you go, some real childhood favourites there for a lot of people. Could be coming back with a bit of a new twist.
Yeah, making me rather nostalgic. Thank you very much indeed. Kate Moody, our business editor, thank you so much.